Hey friends, I thought we'd close out the week of test driving the new format with something a bit more light and fun. And our boy Zohran was just on The View. Now, I'm not a regular viewer of that show, but I am somebody who goes around wearing a Zohran Mamdani t-shirt. It's in the laundry now, or I would have put it on for this episode. You know, don't get me wrong. I'm sure if he becomes mayor, he'll sometimes do things that disappoint me. That's life. That's politics. I would much rather be occasionally disappointed by someone navigating all the messy trade-offs and compromises that inevitably go into the real world exercise of power than to preserve the purity of leftists who never stray from the path because they never achieve any kind of political power in the first place. Like, vintage comic books that never get creased because they're still in the original packaging. And genuinely, I think the guy is by far the best democratic socialist communicator we've had in the United States since Bernie Sanders. And it's been really exciting to see him do his thing. And I saw that he got asked a couple of nonsense questions on The View about Palestine and related subjects. So yeah, this seemed like it could be fun. Let's give it a watch.
Welcome back. Zohran Mamdani has been a political lightning rod since pulling off a stunning victory in the New York City mayoral primary, winning the Democratic nomination with more votes than any candidate in the city's history. His grassroots campaign and social progressive message is resonating beyond the borders of New York and even has, the White House calling him out. So please welcome New York State Assemblyman and Democratic mayoral candidate, Zohran Mamdani. Hold on now, we got an hour of the show. So y'all gonna have to calm down so we can talk to you.
Okay. Well, you
You're
certainly have some fans here, Assemblyman.
It's a pleasure.
Now, a year ago, you were a largely unknown state assemblyman. Now, at 33 years old.
I got hula hoops. I'm older than you.
At 33, you are a rising star in the Democratic Party. You are the front runner to become the next mayor of New York City this November. My question is, did you see this coming? And what do you credit this meteoric rise to?
First I want to say it's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for having me.
Sure.
It really is a joy to be here.
Just name dropped you.
When we started this campaign, we thought we had a chance to win. We thought it was a very small chance. It would require everything to go the way that it needed to. And the first decision that we made was to listen to New Yorkers. A lot of times politicians will lecture New Yorkers as to what they should care about. Say, these are the things that you should be asking me about. And we wanted to go out to New Yorkers and ask them, what do you care about in this city? And we heard from them, cost of living, cost of living, cost of living.
Yeah.
Can't afford my rent, can't afford my childcare, can't afford my groceries, can't even afford $2.90 to ride the bus.
And yep, for anyone tracking that, it took about 90 seconds after he sat down and 20 seconds after he started talking for him to get to the core campaign themes: affordability, childcare, free public transportation, cost of living, cost of living, cost of living. This was always one of my favorite things about Bernie Sanders, just, relentlessly message focused on, class and bread and butter issues, and just, absurdly more message disciplined than so many other politicians. I mean, even a lot of, Bernie-crats are easily distracted by culture war sideshows, but, you asked Bernie what he had for lunch yesterday, and he'd find a way to make the answer about breaking up the big banks and instituting Medicare for all. You wake Bernie up in the middle of the night, and the first thing he'll tell you is that we're the only major country on earth that doesn't guarantee healthcare as a right. And yeah, I see a lot of that in Zohran in his own different way, and I really like it. Anyway, Let's keep watching.
Right.
And so we decided to build an entire campaign around making the most expensive city in America affordable, because that's what New Yorkers were telling us.
Well, Assemblyman, over the weekend, one of your opponents, embattled Mayor Eric Adams, dropped out of the race. And while Adams didn't name check you, he did appear to make veiled swipes. So let's watch this clip.
I must also sound a warning. Extremism is growing in our politics. Our children are being radicalized to hate our city and our country. Major change is welcome and necessary, but beware of those who claim the answer to destroy the very system we built together over generations. That is not change, that is chaos.
Look, there are those who say the mayor of the largest city in the country should not be accepting bribes from Turkey and then sucking up to Donald Trump for a pardon, but we cannot listen to those people. If mayors stopped doing those things, there would be chaos.
So what is your response to that? And why do you think he's decided to drop out now?
You know, there have been rumors that he would drop out for weeks, for months, frankly, even for more than a year. And I can't speak to the decision of why he finally came to that, but I can tell you that in hearing his words, the most extreme thing that I can think of are the policies that he's delivered to the city over 4 years. This is a mayor who raised the rent by 12% on 2 million people, who raised the water bill, highest it's been in 13 years, and supported Con Edison when they wanted to increase gas
How
and
does a
electric.
mayor raise rent?
So the mayor in a city of 8.5 million people controls a thing called the Rent Guidelines Board. Has 9 appointees, the mayor appoints them all. Every year that board determines whether the rent will rise for about 2.5 million New Yorkers who live in rent-stabilized
Oh,
apartments.
rent stabilized.
And so he's increased the rent 12% over this time. The previous mayor had frozen it 3 times.
I'm not going to keep saying this because it would get boring, but God, that was a perfect answer.
Okay, let's talk about President Trump because he had a lot to say about you.
Dear friend of mine.
Let's quickly tick through all the things that Trump said about you, and let's get that out of the way. All right, number one, he's attacking you as a communist. Are you?
No, I'm a democratic socialist. That means I believe in dignity for all people.
It means more than that.
Yeah, I think
You're not a communist. I agree with that.
No, I'm not a communist. And I think, a lot of New Yorkers have asked me, what does it mean that you're a democratic socialist?
Yeah.
And I tell them to think about the words of Dr. King from decades ago. He said, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism. There has to be a better distribution of wealth for all of God's children in this country. And that's the hard part.
Okay. So you're like sort of like a Scandinavian type of politician, I would say, right?
A little more brown, but yes.
Okay.
There are a lot of ways you can answer that question. I might be tempted to start talking about Pelle Dregsted's book, Nordic Socialism. We did a live show with Pelle about that in LA that, shared on the channel over break. But, his very succinct answers to are you like a Scandinavian politician go a little bit more brown, but yes, that works.
Okay. Okay, he's rooting for your opponent, Andrew Cuomo. Why do you think that is?
He is looking to clear the field for Andrew Cuomo because he knows that Andrew Cuomo would clear the field for Trump's agenda. This is speaking about a former governor who, when he looked at the deployment of the National Guard in California, told New Yorkers, don't overreact. This is a moment where we have to address the administration for what it is, which is authoritarian. It's going to require us to do everything in our power to fight back, not to coordinate like Andrew Cuomo has done, being on the phone with Donald Trump, or collaborate like Eric Adams has done by welcoming ICE into the city.
We have asked Andrew Cuomo to come on the show. Let's see if he comes on so he can respond to you.
Good to see you.
Okay. Number 3, he says that he'll withhold, this really is something. Trump says that he will withhold federal funding for New York City if you win. Can he do that, number one? And my question is that going to stop people from voting for you?
This is just one of the many threats that Donald Trump makes. Every day he wakes up, he makes another threat, a lot of the times about the city that he actually comes from. And what is angering to me is not what Donald Trump does, because we've come to expect that from him, but it's the idea that we have to accept that as the law, the idea that we have to accept that as normal. We have to fight that because we know not only is it an overreach from a federal administration, it's an example of what he's done elsewhere.
Yeah.
In California, he's spoken about withholding federal funding. The attorney general there has estimated that for every dollar they spend in legal fees, they've won more than 30,000 back in funds they would have lost. I'm proud and lucky to say that here in New York, we have an incredible attorney general, Tish James, who's been on the front lines of that same fight.
Isn't that tampering, though? Isn't that isn't that tampering when you threaten somebody and say, if you vote for this person,
Yeah.
isn't that
I think so.
voter
It's-
tampering?
it's-
It's the thing that he says that everybody does. Now he's doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Okay. He also,
Familiar with fraud.
here's my
Yeah.
last.
It is kind of interesting, actually, that this vote for the wrong guy and will financially punish the voters thing registers as a little shocking in the domestic US context. Even after 10 years of Trump dominating the news cycle and kind of the political norms we used to have are like a distant memory now. Certainly it's hard for anything he says or does to be all that shocking. This one still feels just a little bit shocking, but globally, this is just standard American practice. This is US imperialism 101, right? That's a nice country you've got there. It would be a shame if we had to, slap a whole bunch of debilitating economic sanctions on it because you voted for the wrong guy.
Here's my last one. He wants to use cities like New York as military training grounds. Can you stop him?
He wants to do a whole lot of things with this city, and we're going to fight him every step of the way, as long as it is something that comes at the expense of this city. And what I mean by that is that if Donald Trump picks up the phone and he says, you know what, I finally want to deliver on cheaper groceries that I campaigned on, I'll say, absolutely, let's work together.
Well, when
But
does that happen? When
that's
the
pigs
thing.
whistle.
That's not happening anytime soon,
Yeah.
because all the things that he calls mayors in this city or former governors about is about his own interests. And we deserve a mayor who will look to the people of the city and see that's who I'm accountable to, not look to the White House and ask for permission.
Okay.
Mr. Assemblyman, as a proud Democratic socialist,
You can call me Zohran.
Zohran, I feel inappropriate calling that, but you've become the new poster child in some ways for the GOP. Donald Trump's obviously excited for you to be in the race. Even members of your own party, like Leader Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, both New Yorkers, have been reluctant to endorse you. Kamala Harris gave what I would call sort of a tepid endorsement. Why do you think members of your own party have been hesitant to embrace you at this juncture?
The governor of New York, though, endorsed
Hopeful.
you.
She did. And what I would say is that Donald Trump is going through the stages of grief. First, it was denial. And he was trying to do everything he could. He was looking at polling. He was calling Cuomo. He was publicly speaking about how he wanted to narrow this race. And he's gotten his first wish. He's gotten Eric Adams out of this race. But now he's going through acceptance. And what I've been really excited by is the endorsements, like you said, Sonny, from not only Governor Hochul, not only from Majority Leader of the State Senate Andrea Stewart Cousins, Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie, Attorney General Tish James that we were just speaking about, but also the fact that I wouldn't be sitting here with you if it was endorsements that made all of the difference. It was the people of the city.
But Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are trying to win the midterms, win back the House and the Senate for Democrats. So why specifically do you think they're hesitant to endorse you?
Notice that the basic premise of this question is that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer are geniuses at winning elections, and they really have their finger on the pulse of what will or will not win elections. It's maybe taking a beat to think about exactly why we're supposed to think that's true.
I can't speak to their thoughts and their interest in this. What I can tell you, however, is that what we have built in this city is also an indication of what politics can be. Oftentimes after the November general election, we heard that young people were leaving the Democratic Party. They were getting disinterested in politics. And we built a campaign where we said, what if we treated them with respect and not condescension? What if we asked them what they needed in the city? We made the top 3 highest performing age groups all under the age of 35. That's something that we haven't seen in the city before. That needs to be at the heart of our politics across the country. Thank you.
We're going to go and come back with more with Zohran Mamdani when we come back. We are back with Zohran Mamdani. Sarah has a question.
Yes, Assemblyman, you're running for mayor of New York and not prime minister of Israel.
Now, given that very reasonable way that she just opened her question, you'd think that Blondie was gearing up to ask, so why is it that you think you're constantly being given these ridiculous Israel questions, where even though you're running for mayor of New York and not prime minister of Israel, people are constantly demanding to know whether you'll condemn Hamas for the millionth time, or whether you'll condemn this or that slogan, or whether you'll affirm that Israel has a right to exist, or whether you'll affirm that it has a right to exist as a Jewish state. Why are you people asking you these questions with zero relevance to the job you're actually running for? Aren't they wasting your time? But that is not where she's going with this. In fact, this is the clip that first made me think it would be fun to do an episode about this appearance. So let's keep rolling.
But you've made inflammatory statements like calling Israel an apartheid state and questioning its right to exist as a Jewish state. Just this week, you were evasive with a reporter about condemning Hamas.
And this is probably a good time to say that I admire the guy's self-discipline in just sitting there smiling blandly while people, lie to his face about what he said. I mean, that's, it's a skill.
Given New York has the largest Jewish population outside of Israel, why should voters who see this as a moral red line trust your clarity and judgment?
I know I have to stop pausing every 10 seconds. It's going to be hard during this chunk, but I really want to say that an obvious answer here would be look at the polls. I'm winning Jewish New Yorkers by double digits. Why are you speaking for them, my Shiksa friends? And look, I get why it wouldn't be a good idea for him to respond that way. And the response we're about to see him give is obviously way more rhetorically effective, but good Lord. And no, Tom, of course, the word Islamophobia is not uttered once, because it never is in these discussions.
Well, I really appreciate this question and an opportunity to just clear up, I think, a number of misconceptions. First and foremost, you're right. I am running to be the mayor of the city, and this city will be the focus of my administration, ensuring that we make this a city everyone can afford and everyone knows that they belong to. And also, millions of New Yorkers, myself included, care deeply about what's happening in Israel and Palestine. And so to be very, very clear, of course, I condemn Hamas. Of course, I've called October 7th what it was, which is a horrific war crime. And of course, my belief in a universality in international law is also the same set of beliefs that have led me to describe what's happening in Gaza as a genocide.
And by the way, my own position is that this is exactly the right way to answer the do you condemn Hamas question. I understand why so many leftists and pro-Palestine people hate that question, because they very correctly see that it's being asked in bad faith, that even asking it, even setting up the test, is an attempt at sort of sleazy and silly guilt by association. That, it's, the intent is to smear people speaking out against apartheid and genocide by raising the possibility that, like, what they're really doing is deeply disguised apologetics for Hamas. And it's a disgusting insinuation. But I think refusing to answer because you have so much contempt for the question is really kind of falling into the trap. Like, yeah, they're asking it in bad faith. It's a trap, but refusing to answer is falling into the trap. The correct answer, which is more or less what Zohran does here, is yes, of course I do. Right? Of course I condemn that, because I think all attacks on civilians are wrong. And for that exact same reason, I condemn the IDF many, 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 many times over, because the IDF has violated that same principle many, 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 many times over. Right? The truth is that Hamas did commit some pretty bad war crimes on October 7th. And I'm not talking about the exaggerated or lurid stories that have been debunked about mass rapes or beheaded babies. I'm just talking about basic stuff that no one really denies. They definitely intentionally attacked lots of civilians, and in fact, filmed themselves doing so. Taking civilians as hostages is a war crime in itself, right? And acknowledging all that takes absolutely nothing away from your opposition to the far, far, far worse Israeli atrocities. The mass displacement of millions of people and the outright genocide that we've seen played out over the course of the last 2 years. And it's not equating the two. One is obviously at a scale that absolutely dwarfs the other. And saying this doesn't mean you're saying that history started on October 7th. You can acknowledge that October 7th was one link in a very long chain, very long cycle of violence that ultimately traces back to the brutal realities of ethnic cleansing and apartheid at the beginning of it all. It takes nothing away from any of that. In fact, saying it is not only obviously correct in itself, but it makes you far more credible to persuadable people when you say the rest of that, because it means you're serious when you say, no, I think that killing civilians is an abomination, full stop. And that's why I'm so outraged by what's going on in the last 2 years, which is just like a violation of that principle so much more egregious that even comparing the two, it's like it's like Jeffrey Dahmer to a shoplifter. I mean, so anyway, let's keep going.
Because what we see is a war crime being answered with war crimes. And what we see is every single hour, the Israeli military killing a Palestinian child for close to 2 years. And it's a horror that many New Yorkers feel so deeply. And my job, I can't stop that as the mayor of the city. I can make clear my own values, my own commitments. And it is a value and a commitment to humanity, to safety, to justice for all people that extends to everyone, Israelis, Palestinians, and everyone else across the
And
world.
recognizing that people do disagree with you.
Absolutely.
I am one of those people on some of these points.
Absolutely. And that you're disagreeing with me doesn't mean that you shouldn't be in this city or you shouldn't be celebrated and part of the city that I'm trying to lead. And I think that's the other part of growing up as a New Yorker, learning that disagreement and difference is part of what it means to be here. And I want to be a mayor, not just for the people who voted for me, not just for the people who agree with me, but every New Yorker. And that means that if a New Yorker disagrees with me about Israel, I'm still fighting for them to make sure that they can afford this city, be safe in this city, and see the city as their home.
Well, so one of the things that I've heard you talk about is making the city affordable for everybody, and that you're going to, put a tax on people who make over $1 million or whatever. But what I want to know
With an
is,
exception for Joy.
think again, my friend. But listen, on day one, why aren't you going to big corporations like Amazon and Google and making sure that they pay what could really help the city raise up and get us where we need to do? Because I need to hear somebody say, because
And I guess I did just want to go back to that last point of people who disagree with him and how he still wants to fight for those people and he wants to make sure that they get an affordable city and childcare and all of that, because I know that's also anodyne, that it's easy to just tune it out, but I actually think that buried in there's something pretty crucial about the moral core of socialist politics. I remember years ago on Chapo Trap House, I've long since forgotten the context, but Amber Frost, the best of the Chapos, said something about how the best thing about going from being a lib to being a socialist is that you can stop morally means testing people in your head and just say that every bastard deserves better. And I've always loved that, right? It hits just the right note. We want the worst person, the person with the shittiest and grossest and dumbest opinions you've ever met, to have healthcare and childcare and a decent place to live and material security and dignity and a reasonable say in what goes on in their workplaces, because all people should have that because they're people. Full stop.
it's the thing nobody says. They say, oh, we're going to make people pay, but they're not clear. They came in, they said, we're going to make these jobs, people are going to have these, they're going to have work. But then they had to fight to unionize because they're not getting paid enough.
Absolutely.
So I don't understand why the focus, if the focus is for New Yorkers to be lifted and New York State to be lifted and put in the right perspective, why the focus isn't on the companies that could be doing a lot more for the places have their places, but it doesn't happen.
Instead of the individual, or including the individual taxpayers.
corporate?
You mean corporations? So,
As I said,
yeah,
Amazon
right,
and Google,
right.
corporations
Corporations.
who don't seem to pay
Their
the
fair
same
share.
kinds of taxes everyone else pays.
Yeah.
Look, if you were running for mayor, I'd be voting for you, because I think Whoopi, to your point, the corporate greed that we're seeing in this country, it cannot be separated from the level of inequality that people are living through.
Mhm.
And one of the key revenue proposals I've put forward, our agenda from the day we started was about freezing the rent for more than 2 million tenants, making the slowest buses in the country fast and free, delivering universal childcare. So no longer would a family pay $25,000 a year just to find childcare for one kid. And what we've said is that two of the main ways we pay for it, one of them would be to raise the top corporate tax rate. This is a corporate tax rate that applies to the most profitable companies that do business in the state, like the ones that you've named, to that of New Jersey. So it would just match that of our neighbor, 11.5% that they have over there. By matching our neighbor, we would raise $5 billion a year. And that would be money we could reinvest into working in middle-class New Yorkers' lives so that everyone could afford.
So you don't
Do
think
you
that
have
will
any-
drive them out?
You heard it, you heard it here first, folks. New Jersey is a shining beacon. It's a model for the whole world. But seriously, it is genuinely amazing that all these fucking oligarchs and their lapdogs in the media are so terrified of just the slightest, tiniest bit of redistribution, that they're having fits and writing op-eds evoking Soviet breadlines and gulags, because Zohran wants to raise the tax rate for individual millionaires by literally like 1% or 2%. Got the sense that Whoopi didn't even like that part, and raise the corporate tax rate to match New Jersey, right? To fund social programs. Like, come on, guys. I know a lot of people are pretending they're going to leave New York City over that, but who's kidding who?
Of the city, then.
No, so the nature of our tax law is that applies to any business doing business here. They could be headquartered in Miami, but if they're doing business here, it applies to them. And the reason that I believe they'll keep doing business here is because this is one of the largest economies in the world.
Right.
Everyone wants to be here.
And when you talk about, because people think everybody that makes money does not care about the city. And sometimes I think it's important for folks, when you're talking about raising taxes also on people, because the people who have money keep the city going.
Yeah.
And sometimes people feel pushed out of the city because the zillions that they're paying, whether it's for the MTA, for the bus, for the this, doesn't seem to be appreciated. So I just want to make sure that you understand people want to make the city work. And people will back you if everybody is paying their fair share.
Absolutely.
If everybody pays, then I don't mind paying. If just some folks are paying, I'm not happy.
And Amazon is not paying, then you're not happy.
Yeah.
And I think it's exactly as both of you have said, right? You look at some of these companies who are making the most amount of money in the world, and you're asking, why are they facing less regulation than the bodega on my corner?
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
No.
And that's why you have
You're
to
going to fix it.
Yes, you have to have a policy that on the one hand makes it easier for a small business to flourish. You cut fines and fees by 50%. You say no longer does a person who wants to open a barbershop have to fill out 24 forms, go to 7 agencies, go to 12 in-person events. You actually make it easier to be an entrepreneur, and you ensure that these companies that are making money hand over fist are actually paying their fair share.
And this is a form of class collaboration that I actually like. There's an old Eric Olin Wright lecture you can find on YouTube where he starts by talking about some old poster he remembers from the 1970s that says, class consciousness is knowing which side of the fence you're on, and class analysis is about knowing who's there with you. And he says, yeah, that's exactly right. But I'd add that class analysis is also about knowing who's sitting on the fence. In other words, which layers of the population have mixed or indeterminate interests, so they could end up breaking either way. And if some petty proprietor with like a halal food stand or something, maybe he doesn't even have any employees, or it's a family thing or whatever, and that guy might actually benefit from some of the social programs, Zohran is talking about, like free childcare. Maybe he won't love some of the taxes, but if you could ease that guy into a coalition dominated by working class interests by throwing him some stuff about, we'll reduce the number of forms you have to fill out to start a business, that doesn't throw anybody under the bus in terms of the kinds of regulations that we actually care about, ones that are there to benefit workers, then yeah, hell yeah, more of that, please. And yes, Trent, exactly. The ultra rich feel pushed out, but the poor are literally pushed out.
Going to do that.
Yes, ma'am.
We'll be right back. We are back with Zohran Montgomery. Alyssa has the question.
So Zohran, back in 2020, you called for defunding the police, something you've since walked back. You also called the NYPD racist, anti-queer, and a threat to public safety in 2020, but now agree they deserve an apology. You initially refused to denounce highly charged rhetoric related to Israel, then later said you would discourage its use. How can New Yorkers trust you and not be concerned that consultants are getting in your ear to get you elected, but you still hold all of those positions?
Well, they can rest assured that it isn't consultants in my ear. And I think this is another part of, to be a young person looking to lead is also to leave the opening for growth and understanding. And I can tell you, growing up in this city, I thought often about safety and justice, and I saw how justice was often left aside, whether it was the Central Park Five, whether it was Sean Bell, whether it was Eric Garner, whether it was watching the news of Michael Brown. And then in 2020, to see the murder of George Floyd, it felt as if there had never been a wider chasm in my life between those things. And after that, becoming an assembly member and learning about the ways in which you deliver justice is by intertwining it with safety. Can't be done alone. And learning that behind the headlines, behind the caricatures, we're speaking about police officers who are just trying to do their best. And my job as a mayor is to represent those officers who put their lives on the line, represent Muslim New Yorkers who were illegally surveilled, represent Black and Brown New Yorkers who've been the victims of police brutality, and do all of it
And
with
Jewish
a commitment.
Americans who assault
Absolutely.
and danger.
And white people,
Absolutely.
everybody. We talk about
yeah.
everybody.
This
And
is a
can I-
run-on sentence that includes every New Yorker because of the fact that safety and justice can be non-negotiable no matter who we're speaking about.
And can I
And I was watching this earlier. The next part, I think he actually does a really nice job of threading the needle. And I know some people, including some, whose views I generally have a lot of respect for, were upset he was apologizing to cops because they say you should never apologize for being right. But I don't totally buy that for two reasons. First, I actually, don't think he was right about the defund part. I think that was always a bad slogan. It was a bad slogan first because it, often sounds like you're saying to abolish. I remember, like DSA, printed up, and I remember waving around at protest signs that said defund ICE, and we didn't just mean that we wanted ICE's budget cut a little bit, right? We meant like get rid of that funding line entirely. So I think there is some fuzziness about that. And I'm sorry, I do think police abolitionism is dumb as shit. I don't believe all interpersonal violence will completely wither away, even in an advanced socialist society where poverty is something you read about in history books. I think we'll still need some kind of dedicated law enforcement if we're not just going to have like vigilantes or, vendettas between families or whatever. And certainly if you're talking about abolishing right now, which is how anybody would normally hear the word abolish, right? Like 19th century abolitionists weren't people who were like, well, maybe in 100 years we won't need slavery anymore. Let's gradually work towards that. Nobody would have called that an abolitionist position, right? Abolish usually means get rid of right now. And if, you got rid of all policing right now, that just, under capitalism, right? That would just be a complete nightmare, right? Like private security for rich people and Mad Max for everybody else. And, even if when you say defund, you don't mean abolish, you just mean slash funds, which, to be fair, is what most people meant by it. That, we're going to slash some funds for the police and we're going to reallocate it to these other city services that we like a lot more. I still don't think that made that much sense as framing. I mean, sure, some years in some cities absolutely cut that budget, but there really isn't as much money in police budgets as a lot of people think there is. During the summer of 2020, I actually wrote a Jacobin article where I did a little back the napkin math on this. And it turns out you could reduce the operating budget of the NYPD to zero, right? Without even closing the funding gaps between the best and the worst funded schools in New York City. The idea that you're going to find the money to fund municipal social democracy in what's currently allocated to police budgets never really made sense just on the level of arithmetic. And honestly, I think to even have a conversation about what the correct funding levels should be, you need to bring in a lot more specifics. Like, obviously, I think if we had a more economically equal society, which would absolutely be one with way, way, way less crime than our late capitalist hellscape has, we need to spend a lot less money on law enforcement, right? There just wouldn't be as much need. But there's an order of operations there. Right now, right this second, most working class people do worry about street crime. The people defunding is supposed to help, by and large, don't want it, right? Like in every poll of black voters where you ask, do you think the police presence in your neighborhood is too much, too little, or about right? Too much is always the least popular option, right? The other two between them take up like 80%, the ones I remember seeing. People, if anything, feel like it, takes too long when they call and all that stuff. And that doesn't necessarily mean that people who answer not enough or about right don't also worry that the police are, going to be abusive. I think sometimes it's both. I think even people who know that cops can be violent and racist and awful often worry even more than they worry about that stuff, about street crime itself. And oh my God, chapter, totally agreed. Abolish ICE still. Yes. I am still unchanged about abolishing ICE from waving around that sign in 2017. I think ICE is a human rights abomination, and a free society doesn't need an entire dedicated police force just dedicated to national police force dedicated to doing nothing but tracking down gardeners and construction workers who don't have their paperwork in order, for God's sake. So one more point about this, police funding as a broad category decomposes into funding for distinct things. Tom from Yacubia says, hold up, I read somewhere Mamdani's going to change the NYPD's motto to fuck 12. All right, well, we can have a discussion about that. But, I think sometimes we need to disaggregate the different police functions that are being funded if we're going to have a smarter conversation about funding. Like, I certainly want way less militarized police departments. So sure, if they have like tanks and planes, I mean, I live some of the time in LA, and the LAPD practically seems to have its own air force, then yeah, sure, let's cut all that. But I actually want way more money for stuff like training cops in techniques of nonviolent de-escalation. Back in 2020, something I used to hear all the time was, oh, more training won't help. But I've never understood why people thought that. Why wouldn't it? By global standards, it's totally absurd how little training American cops get before they're let loose out on the street. I actually think more training might help a lot in diminishing the number of times that situations get escalated to the point where there's an act of police violence, right, from some nervous, trigger-happy cop. So all of this is to say, to the extent that Zohran is apologizing, to the extent that what Zohran is apologizing for is having once taken the defund position, I actually don't agree that he was right. I have some issues with that position. Second, with regard to this idea that you should never apologize when you're right, I don't know, man. I don't know how many human relationships can be navigated without occasionally apologizing for putting something too sharply, even when you don't think you were wrong about the heart of the issue, right? I mean, I was married for like 10 years. Come on. There are a lot of jokes people tell about this that reflect that basic reality about how navigating human relationships tend to work. And if you say, okay, but he's not going to be married to the fucking NYPD, fair enough. Except as a mayor, he kind of is married to the NYPD. If you want to do serious police reform to actually like bring down police brutality and, you know, find ways to ameliorate at least some of the structural problems that lead to it, you do kind of have to be married to the department at least a little bit, right? The result of the New York City mayoral election is not going to be to smash the state and replace the NYPD with a squad of Red Guards or something. That's not going to happen. So he needs to keep at least enough of those officers on side that mass defections and mass sabotage don't wreck his mayoralty. And then, okay, I was watching this earlier, and in the next part, I think he does something really clever in terms of threading the needle between going from being sympathetic to the concerns of rank and file officers to actually making his proposal for pretty substantive police reform. So let's take a watch.
Have you formally apologized to the NYPD?
These are conversations that I'm having individually with officers, and I've appreciated that because
just wanted to pause. These are conversations I'm having individually with officers to say another piece of wisdom I remember from Amber Frost on Chapo years ago was I don't remember the context anymore, but she said there's no such thing as a public apology. All real apologies are delivered in private, which always seemed exactly right to me. Drea said, when facing a moral or political dilemma, people must ask themselves, what did Mr. Rogers do? And Red Dogra said, Mr. Rogers had very strong sweater game. I used to live in Pittsburgh for a couple of years, and I lived in Squirrel Hill, but I'd often walk through Shady Side, which is, if you kind of have a mental map of Pittsburgh, right? You know, like Squirrel Hill's over here, then, you know, Shady Side is like right there. And I'd pass by actually the church, you know, Fred Rogers' church, you know, where he'd been pastor. And, you know, every time I did it, I would think, oh, I am walking through Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. That's very strange. Yeah, Luke says it depends on the training, right? If the training indoctrinates existing attitudes, more doesn't help. Yeah, no, that's certainly true, right? I mean, there's lots of police training that's horrible, but I think, you know, I think there's a lot of training that would help, right? Again, you know, sort of, you know, conflict de-escalation kinds of techniques, as opposed to like actually sometimes you even get these like psychotic police trainings where they're like, oh yeah, you know, you can't hesitate to pull the trigger, you know, you got to be a warrior cop. And of course, yes, more of that makes the situation actively worse. But yeah, more training and like conflict de-escalation, things like that might bring American policing closer to the global standard.
it's through those conversations with rank and file officers that I've learned more about the difficulties of this job, the difficulties where, you know, for example, when I started running this race, about 200 officers were leaving the department every month. Now it's 350. And when you ask officers why, they'll tell you forced overtime. And what they mean by that is, you know, you got 3 days off at the end of the week, you're planning a trip with your family, and at the last minute you're told, second day you got to be back. And part of the reason you got to be back is because we're asking cops to do everything we can think of. We're asking them to handle mental health calls. We're asking them to deal with homelessness. Every year now, cops respond to 200,000 mental health calls. So our proposal is allow the officers to do their job of tackling serious crime and create a Department of Community Safety that deals with homelessness, that deals with mental health crisis, so that we don't have response times like we do today, which are closer to 16 minutes.
I think that was really good. I think that was a really solid answer. You know, he's floated a really big substantive criminal justice reform proposal, actually not even having armed cops be the first line of response for a lot of these sort of non-lethal crimes in the first place, right? Having the separate Department of Community Safety. But I think that was a really smart way of pitching it. Like, actually, this would help rank and file cops themselves, because they could stick to serious crime and still get more time to spend with their families rather than having to do overtime all the time. No notes as far as the framing goes, right? I think that's a really strong answer. Now, exactly how would this Department of Community Safety work? Who would you be hiring? How much would you have to pay them to, get people with the relevant skills to even be willing to do that job? I think these are big questions, and I'm not, 100% sure the experiment would work, but I think it's at least worth trying, right? Especially in combination with his proposed programs that could decrease unemployment and economic misery in New York and maybe bring down crime in general, right? Because the two tend to go together. So there might be something there. Anyway, I think this is basically it for the interview. But let's just finish out the last little bit here.
Yeah. We've run out of time.
Oh, come on.
No, we did. We've
I
run
gotta
out of
come
time. I guess you should, because there are more questions.
Yeah.
But I will say this about you. Admitting to growing up is a great thing.
Yeah.
Our thanks to City Democratic mayoral candidate Zohran Mandami. We will be right back.
All right. Well, we won't be back with them because we were just here for the Zohran part. Anyway, like I said, I genuinely think that guy is the best political communicator we've gotten yet out of all the waves of post-Bernie Democratic Socialist politicians since that first run in 2016. So I'm officially really excited about that dude becoming mayor, which inshallah, will happen in a few weeks. Which reminds me, we don't have all the details yet, so I can't give you an exact start time or a link for tickets or any of that stuff yet. I certainly will as soon as I have it. But Jason Miles and RM Brown and I are going to be doing a live show in New York City on election nights. That's Tuesday, November 4th. Mark that on your calendars. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We'll do like a live podcast to talk about the election. I can tell you the venue, actually. It's going to be Bar Frida in Queens, which is the same place we did the meet and greet a few weeks ago. So yeah, we're going to, like, when I was there for the meet and greet, one of the owners and I took a look around, and he showed me the space in the basement where we can, they have concerts and stuff, and we could actually do the live podcast part of the evening there, and then we'll go upstairs to the main part of the bar to have a watch party after, and with any luck, nothing dramatically will have changed in the next month, and we'll find out that Zohran won by like double digits while we were doing the live podcast taping. And so it'll be less of an exciting watch party and more of a straightforward celebration. But either way, I really hope I see some of you guys then. Meanwhile, I will be back on Monday with a show about the federal government shutdown fight, which unfortunately I suspect will still be going on then, unless, even more unfortunately, the Dems capitulate over the weekend, which, okay, is also entirely possible. It's kind of what they do. But either way, there'll be things to say about how it all either is still shaking out or how it all, at that point in the past tense, shook out. So we're going to be continuing the experiment with these morning shows into next week. So that episode is going to be on Monday morning at 11:30 a.m. on the East Coast, 8:30 a.m. here on the West Coast. And I will see you then. Left is best.